A couple weeks ago, I put out a video on the rise and fall of Junior Johnson and Associates. If you missed that one, feel free to go back and watch it. I'll drop a card so you can watch it now, and then come back once you've watched it. Okay, now at this point, you either don't care to go back and watch it or you've seen it already, so let's discuss more on what the title of this video is about, because I'm sure that's why you clicked on this video. And yes, this one is a very dark side of NASCAR history. In that video on Junior Johnson's team, we discussed one of his longest tenured drivers in the early days of his team, Lonnie Leroy Yarbrough, but most just knew him as Leroy. Again, just because of the way I talk with a southern accent, I want to specify that he's not related to Cale Yarbrough. The names are similar, but they're not even spelled the same. But me talking like the redneck I am, I just want to specify the fact that those two were not related. But let's talk a little bit more about the background on Leroy Yarbrough first. Shout out to Ian Perez 48 on YouTube. He did make a video on Leroy as well back 2 years ago, but I noticed that it only got 5,000 views, so perhaps this story can also shed some more light on what happened to Leroy to those who may be unfamiliar with his situation. Yarbrough grew up in the west side of Jacksonville, Florida as one of a total of 6 children, but from an early age it was clear that he was going to be a racer, building his first car at the age of just 16 years old. By age 19, Yarbrough found his way on the scene of local dirt tracks, and eventually he ended up in NASCAR, to which he would eventually end up racing for Junior Johnson. And I didn't mention this in my video on the team, but Junior Johnson was once quoted as referring to Leroy as the best driver he ever had. Yarbrough's 1969 season was fantastic, topped off of winning the Daytona 500 in dramatic form with a last lap pass on Charlie Glotzback to take the victory in a season that would see 7 wins, including becoming the first driver to accomplish NASCAR's Triple Crown, which is winning 3 of NASCAR's top 4 prestigious races in one season. But as good as 1969 was, I think it's overlooked at just how far Yarbrough's career goes downhill in 1970. You know, Junior Johnson's team was severely impacted by a manufacturer withdrawal early on in the 1970 season, and while he'd eventually returned back to fielding cars for Leroy Yarbrough, Yarbrough was left scrambling to find an opportunity early on in that season. While he'd get a win that season driving for Johnson at Charlotte Motor Speedway, a hard crash for him at Texas World Speedway in 1970 may have just been the beginning of overlooked medical issues in his racing career that helped contribute to his racing career's downfall. He was involved in that crash in a test session at the old track in Texas, in which it left Yarbrough disoriented to the point that he had no memory of his fellow driver Cale Yarbrough picking him up in Texas a few days later and flying him home. Yarbrough also had no memory of flying to Martinsville Speedway or running in the race there that week. It just seemed as if he went with what was happening but had no memory of it. Looking back on that today, well, perhaps this was clear signs of concussion to Yarbrough. But back in the 1970s, those kinds of answers were a lot harder to find, of course, compared to today's medical professionals working closely with those in NASCAR. Dale Earnhardt Jr. has been very open about suffering 20 concussions during his NASCAR career, and even then, this came in driving in what most may consider one of the safest times to drive in NASCAR's history. But this is not the case for Yarbrough, who raced in what might be considered one of the most dangerous times in NASCAR racing. He was never really the same after that crash. His performance slowly went away, and even though he had won the Daytona 500 in 1969, just 4 years later, after 1973, he was out of the sport entirely. He even had a few Indy starts in the late 1960s and early 1970s as well, faring fairly well here too, even leading in the inaugural California 500 at Ontario Motor Speedway and then finishing 3rd at Trenton Speedway in 1971. Yarbrough even competed in 3 Indy 500s in 1967, 69, and 70, and then in 1971, he found himself practicing and preparing for a 4th adventure on the bricks of Indianapolis in a Dan Gurney Eagle, when all of a sudden, he spun and crashed hard in turn 1. This accident coming 1 year after his hard NASCAR crash at Texas World Speedway, this certainly left Yarbrough no better than he already was, and he spent the next few months in the span of June 1971 and November 1971 going in and out of hospitals with various issues and memory problems. But one guy who was there for him through most of this time was his old boss, Junior Johnson. He wanted to find out what was wrong with his old driver. Why did this crash at Indy seem to be the final cord that snapped on him? Johnson said that Yarbrough could remember everything from 1970 back, but nothing forward, and it seemed like it just happened all at once. You'd go to dinner with him, and they'd put a plate of food in front of him, and he'd just sit and look at it until you said, "Leroy, eat!" Then he'd pick up his knife and fork. That's what Johnson had to say about Leroy's condition during the time that this was happening. Another fellow driver of Leroy's, James Hilton, believed one of the rumors that was said to be ailing Yarbrough. It was said that Yarbrough had contracted Rocky Mountain spotted fever, a bacterial disease that is spread by ticks. It typically begins with fever and headache, which is then followed up a few days later by an intense development of a skin rash, typically starting on one's wrists and ankles. Hilton said that once Yarbrough got the disease, they gave Leroy so much medication that when they did finally treat the disease, he was just no longer himself, and that it eventually led up to his death. Hilton recalled Yarbrough as being a man that didn't deserve that, and that he was one of the good ones. It was also said that Yarbrough drank alcohol very heavily, which surely would be of no help no matter what was actually causing his ailments. Ray Fox said that simply, racing happened to Leroy. Just too many crashes, and they sent him off the deep end. Perhaps this was the biggest issue. Too many ignored crashes, particularly those in Texas and Indy that left Yarbrough with undiagnosed and untreated brain trauma to the point that his racing career was over, and in one day, in 1980, things took a dark twist of fate. On a Thursday evening in February 1980, Leroy Yarbrough was sat by his mother, Minnie Yarbrough, watching TV together, when out of nowhere, Yarbrough got up and said, "Mother, I hate to do this to you." Confused, Minnie would respond with, "What do you mean?" That's when Yarbrough began to strangle his own mother, intent for some reason that he was to take his mother's own life. Fortunately, her life was spared that day by a nephew who had heard Minnie's screams and hit Yarbrough over the head with a jelly jar, seemingly knocking him out fairly easily, which after knowing the hard crashes he went through along with the obvious mental ailments, this doesn't surprise me that a jelly jar could cause so much damage. Police arrived momentarily, but Leroy would give a fight as they arrested him on charges of first-degree attempted murder of his 65-year-old mother, in addition to assault on a police officer. Yarbrough was committed to the Florida State Hospital at Chattahoochee by the orders of Judge Hudson Olaf of Jacksonville, Florida on March 7, 1980, after Leroy's trial of first-degree attempted murder of his mother and battery to a law enforcement officer. Minnie Yarbrough testified in court that her son had walked up and started strangling her for no reason, but in the end, Judge Olaf's ruling was that Yarbrough was not guilty of attempted murder because of insanity. He ruled that Leroy was unable to distinguish right from wrong at the time of the incident. I believe that this was just simply, as many suggested, the result of ignored head trauma from a career of racing accidents catching up to him, but of course this whole incident could have ended far, far worse. If you're a wrestling fan, well of course you're likely familiar with the incident of Chris Benoit, a once beloved wrestler of the WWE who murdered his wife and young son before taking his own life. Many could say this was similar, as Benoit was involved in many stunts in which head trauma went ignored. Incidents like that is what's led to a higher importance of concussion protocols in all sporting events, including motorsports. Sadly, while the life of Minnie Yarbrough was fortunately spared, her son Leroy Yarbrough's life would be cut short at the age of just 46 years old in December of 1984. Yarbrough spent the rest of his days in rehabilitation centers in both Florida and North Carolina, and on December 6, 1984, Yarbrough had a violent seizure which caused him to fall over, striking his head, losing consciousness immediately. He was rushed to Jacksonville's University Hospital, where he would succumb from his injuries the morning of December 7, 1984. The doctors ruled the cause of death to be internal bleeding within the brain. As much as racing gave Leroy a pathway to a great future, accomplishing more than most racers can claim fame to, unfortunately, he was also the victim of the dark side of NASCAR, crashes resulting in ignored head trauma. There's not many that can say they believe that Yarbrough was a bad guy. He may have had a little too much to drink here and there, but overall, he was highly praised in the NASCAR community. But now in modern days, this former winner of the Great American Race is oftentimes forgotten about, never to be mentioned again, primarily due to what happened on that fateful Thursday evening in 1980. In 1990, however, he was inducted in the National Motorsports Press Association's Hall of Fame at Darlington Raceway in South Carolina. And in 1998, in a list of NASCAR's 50 greatest drivers, Leroy's name was included on that list. But I want to pose this question to you guys now. What's your thoughts on the legacy of Leroy Yarbrough? Was he guilty, or do you stand with what the judge ruled in that he was in no sane mind due to his racing crashes? Does this taint his NASCAR and IndyCar legacy, and could he have been a champion had those many wrecks never happened? Comment what you think down below, and if you're new to my channel, please consider dropping a like and be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon for more great NASCAR content. I'll be at this weekend's race in Atlanta, hopefully bringing you guys some great behind the scenes content this weekend from the infield, both camping and in and out of the garage area. If you happen to see me, please say hello. If you're watching this after the 2022 Folds of Honor Quick Trip 500 race weekend in Atlanta, well, I guess that means that the YouTube algorithm did its job, and you've got some other great content on my channel that you need to catch up on. Anyways, thanks again for taking time to check out my video today. Until next time, I hope you have a great day. Bye guys.
Hey race fans, thanks for watching this video from DannyBTalks. If you're new to my channel, please be sure to hit subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss another video from my channel.